Good evening, and welcome to this good launch of the Good Boy Syndrome by Karthikeyan. Thank you very much for being here. It means a lot to all of us. Karthik, I've known for almost, I think, 20 years or so, close to. And this is a very, very memorable occasion for us to actually be part of his journey in constructing and taking this book out. So we will start with maybe a short introduction by each one of us. So my name is Prashant, old friend of Karthik, and I know quite a few of you who are here as well. Yeah, over to you, Karthik, and then we will. Karthik is of course the author, but more than that, there's a lot more to be said about him. But I will leave him to say that himself.
Maybe just.
Surprise element. Hello everyone, my name is Janaki, Venkat. I'm a friend, co-traveler, long-time associate, co-conspirator for Karthik. So I still have tried to figure out why he's invited me for this session. So I'm definitely going to kind of jam along as we go. In the other parts of my life, I run a business, which I co-founded a business called Janaki. We distribute psychometric assessments and we offer consulting services. It's a 20-year-old organization. Next.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Karthikeyan. I'm called Karthik. Thank you very much for being here for this event. Very, very touching, moving to see all of you. Many known faces and also a few people that I'm meeting here for the first time. So very deeply moved by the fact that you've braved all that Bangalore throws at us to be here. So yeah, I'm I think I've been around now for about 60 years, of which the last 39 I've been meandering the corporate spaces. Worked for about these 39, 40 years in different spaces, partly in organizations, partly outside. Also a bit of a musician, I play the flute, and the writing has been something that happened along the way. So when I first wrote my book along with my colleagues Rishi, who's here, and Rachna, that was something that we wanted to, because we were having a kind of a framework and a story to tell. This one happened just like that, so we'll probably talk about that. So very happy to be here with all of you, and looking forward to the next hour and a half.
Thank you. Janaki, please. So before we start, one of the questions, a friend of mine who had, sent the invitation to attend this, called me up and said, "What's the bad boy doing being the moderator for a Good Boy Syndrome book?" But I think that will add a different perspective, right? So with that, Karthik, you have, from the time you've known professionally and then personally, I've seen you engage with the different constructs. If my memory is correct, earlier tarot, then archetypes, and always pushing to do something very original, very Indian contextual in that. Then the wonderful instrument of time and the whole process of time. I can't just say it's an instrument. And now this whole exploration of the Good Boy Syndrome. So how has that journey been, and how has that sort of now brought you to this juncture of this book, and so just share some of that journey with us.
Okay. Thank you. So how do I put this? I think there's been a part of me which is very restless. Now this restlessness could have gone two ways, right? It could have gone the way which is so unproductively restless, flitting from one thing to another and doing things that don't generate anything, and could have ended up in that sense having accumulated a number of years but not really any worthwhile experience. But I think there is maybe there is the good boy in me which has this thing of saying that you get one chance to play this life, and might as well make the most of it and do something that's so very often, most of the things I started off, I must confess, I did not start with the thing of an end outcome of, there was no grand or a noble kind of a thing of that it must be of help to humanity or nothing altruistic in that sense, right? I will confess that. It was out of an intense curiosity, and I think that's been perhaps part of my journey has always been this. And if I, look at myself, I think I'm an eternal curious child. There's always this thing of saying, let's turn this stone up and see what one might find under it. You never know what might be there. That indeed has been perhaps what's taken me through all of these, many things there. And I think what has happened in all the journeys, all the stones I have lifted, most of them have thrown up something worthwhile. There will be something that has caught my attention and fancy. And I think I've enjoyed converting them into some form of artifacts. So that's the other thing. So I enjoy converting them into artifacts. My curiosity must have some kind of something that I can share with others. So it's like create a playground for others to play. So it's mostly out of a sense of intense play, not out of any desire to work.
Thank you very much. So this book, and I'm sure most of us will read it. Some of you have picked it up now. Has got a lot of enriching material in it. There is a lot of original thought process, reflections. So I'm not, during this time what we discuss, we are not really going to get into the details of what the book contains, because I will urge all of you to actually read it. And then fix up coffee dates with Karthik so that he can explain to you if something needs explanation. But we will look at some of the broad themes, because that's the whole idea, and some of the his own processes and reflections, and Janaki's as well, in terms of from a different perspective. So the book starts with this question of who is a good boy, and I'm going to actually request Janaki to address that first. Because that gives a different thing of what would all of us in that sense. What is our perception of the good boy? And then let Karthik add to that from where he was coming from and he thought of this.
So Karthik has a complete right to say that's not what the good boy is about, with what I'm about to say. So for me, when I read the book, I think the good boy for me is the book actually evoked for me the journey into adulthood. It's a stage in the evolution of a person, and and sometimes when we are growing, we get caught at one location or the other. And to me, it was the kind of what was the universe looking like at a certain stage in the evolution of a person, and that's what the good boy. In a sense, that's what resonated me about what was written there. So, I mean, just in terms of what I mean by evolution, it's like when we are, as children, we're all expressive, spontaneous, we're exuberant, and our parents sometimes, we become too much for them. Maybe some parts of our personality, some parts of what's emerging within us, threaten them. And in a bid to keep us safe, and a bid to keep themselves safe, they put boundaries on us. And they try to kind of say that these are the boundaries that will keep you safe, play within these boundaries, come back home before sunset, or and that extends to so many things. Don't go there, there's danger there. And over a period of time, we internalize these injunctions, and those turn into beliefs, habits, and patterns. And I think what I got from the book as I was reading is the pathos of the good boy. And I was reminded of a quote from Alice Miller, who says that after all this effort, this uphill task of, to garner the love, this uphill effort, and being able to kind of, self-defacement and all of this, I realized that the person they're going to love is not me. It's the person I've created in order for them who can receive this who can please them in a sense. So that to me was the pathos of the good boy, saying I've done all of this effort, I've put in all of this, I've played by the rules, but what about the other parts of me that remain, that I have perhaps edited, that I've not given space for, do I look for permission, do I push myself out? And I was sharing with Karthik that what came to my mind is a story I read somewhere about how monkeys are caught. So some of you may have heard it. It's like, at least in Andhra, when they have to when they catch monkeys, you put you put peanuts in a pot with a small narrow mouth, and then you kind of, the monkey wants the peanuts. The hand is free to go into the mouth of the pot, and so the hand goes in, and then you're trying to take the peanuts out of the pot, and then you can't, because now the hand is now a fist and the mouth is too small for the fist to come out with the peanuts. And that's how monkeys are caught. And while I'm saying this for the good boy, it's true for the good girl also. I mean, it's where we play, you said you want the peanuts, but you can't, with the peanuts comes the loss of my freedom. And so I think there's a big choice. Do I imitate or do I individuate? And that's the question that I think the book evoked for me.
Yeah, I'll come back to you after we hear from Karthik. What was his, sort of, where did it start in terms of your own framing of the good boy, and through the book, has it changed through the writing of the book?
Okay. I think there are two things I want to address. One is, where did it start for me? I also want to just pick on what Janaki said in terms of the. So let me try and attempt both. If I go back first to look at where it all started, and I've talked about it in the book, which is that to me it was actually a bit of a searing look into myself, of saying, and maybe I will say that I will give credit to two things that have been very intrinsically part of my journey here. One is, so I've been in psychoanalysis now for about 4 years. So I work with an analyst who lives in France, an Indian who lives in France, and she's done a wonderful job of uncovering some of my own unconscious patterns and some of the dynamics. And it was through that process, one of the things that led me to looking at myself was the fact that there is this good boy that is inside me. Though I didn't have that name before. Then the other part has been a fairly deep, I would say maybe I don't know the word spiritual quest captures it, but there is a meditative part that's looking inward, within, etc. That's the other thing that has led. These kind of shown, they illuminated some parts of myself which had not been very apparent to me earlier. So then as I kind of became acquainted with this personality, with the persona within me, I was then beginning to see this person all around me. Everywhere. So I work as a coach and a consultant. So everywhere I was coaching and consulting, somehow or the other, synchronicitously or otherwise, I would find myself surrounded with good boys of different types. Give or take, you would find a good boy there. So these were the things that prompted me to say, if it is true so much for myself, and if I think it is true for so many people around me, then maybe there is a story waiting to be written there. Now coming to how I roll the good boy is, I think there is, I've kind of held the view of the good boy as one who's kind of, in a sense, who thinks of his dharma as upholding the essential order of the system. Whatever that essential order is, whatever it is. So in a sense, and that's one of the things I've talked about, some of the peculiarities. Somebody asked me this question, why did you call it a peculiar feature? But this is because peculiar itself is a very peculiar word. It's true. When you scratch the surface, you find different avatars of the good boy. For example, I'm sure many of you will agree with me on this, that if you look at this whole thing of honor killing that happens in the country, right? Do you think that the honor killer is a good boy, or is he not a good boy? Well, just give a sense of what that might be. What do you think?
In his own mind, he is a good boy.
In his mind, is a good boy.
In a certain section of society, is a good boy.
Yeah. So to the family, perhaps. I mean, we can legally, from a law perspective, we might say that he is not, and there are questions that we might pose about that. But in the eyes of that person, and the eyes of the family, in the eyes of the context that surrounds him, absolute good boy, undeniably the good boy, chillingly so. And then we say, how can we, and then we apply our objective frames on top of that. But we understand, we don't see that there's a subjective frame that person holds, which allows him, indeed, the freedom to do that. So this good boy has several, so yeah, in other words, he is upholding the order of that system, which is not necessarily the legal framework. He is upholding the dharmic context of the family or of his cultural thing. And so there is that part of the good boy, and the aspect of, I love the word pathos that you use, Janaki. I think I've called it angst and sorrow, somewhat relatable word. But yes, I think the book is fundamentally not, this is not so much about kind of a character. It is a way of characterizing the good boy, but a good part of what I have written has been around the pathos. So I talked about the angst of the good boy, the sorrow of the good boy, what he stakes, what he loses at times. So I've hopefully tried to look at it from a sense of being very empathetic to the good boy. But I think yes, there is so much that lies within there. It's so easy to dismiss the good boy as a, and that's another thing that I felt very strongly about writing this was that my angst is that I think in society we think of the good boy as perhaps a vestigial phenomenon, you know, like the appendixes, remove it and it'll inconvenient. And we think that it cannot be recontextualized in today's world as anything meaningful at all. So we treat it somewhat, I'm not saying when I say we, I'm generalizing, but there's a tendency to make it somewhat irrelevant or not substantial enough. Nothing could be farther than the truth. And I'm hoping that we are all in a position to understand the good boy with empathy and help recontextualize. Sorry, long answer.
No, but that's very, very insightful. So I'm just going to build on this in the sense that, one is, Janaki, you talked about the good boy or the good girl is one who sort of stays within the boundaries so that won't get harmed by venturing out of. One of the things which Karthik sort of touched upon is that the good boy, in a way, perpetuates the stability, the order of the society. So in that sense, it's not that we want to wish him away, right? Because he's an important ingredient of societal stability in a way, right? And one of the things which Karthik has in this book touched upon, or as an illustration, is this famous movie Diwar, right? And where Amitabh Bachchan is arguably not a good boy, and Shashi Kapoor plays the role of a model human being with all the trappings of being a good boy. And there is this famous dialogue in that movie, in which Amitabh Bachchan is arguing, who's right, my way or your way. And he says, look, I have these buildings, I have this money, etc. What do you have? And he says, Mera paas maa hai, right? And it is not just about that mother is with me in terms of that. It's what that context of what Ma represents in the sense of the moral framework, in terms of what is right and wrong, all of that. So in that, I'm just bringing that here for the on this explanation of the definition of the good boy. But in that movie, and what struck me when I was reading that was also there is a scene where Shashi Kapoor, as a police officer, he chases a thief who's a young boy, and he doesn't stop, so he shoots him. And unfortunately, the boy dies, right? If you remember the movie. So good boy in upholding that, where does that, in a way, the discretion of what is good contextually need to be applied, or do you just go by the rule book of this is good and I will perpetuate it, and no matter what the consequences are? So, Janaki, any thoughts on that?
I think there's so many layers to that. so many layers to that. I think one of the, I think the angle of the good boy that I'm picking up is the need to fit in, and so do right by the system, do the right thing. So if I'm doing what's prescribed by the system and I'm doing the right thing, then I can qualify for the validation of the system, and I can qualify for the approval of the system. And so I think in that sense, any roles I uphold that society in a sense has put down and said these are the rules. As a provider, you will do this. As as a daughter you will do this, as a son you will do this. And if you tick the box, tick all those things, you can say you earned. Who gives you this certificate, by the way? Who tells you that you're the good boy? I don't think there's anybody handing out certificates anywhere to say. It's just to say, okay, what does the rule book say? Have I done this? Am I doing this? Am I providing for my family? Am I doing this? Am I taking care of, as a wife, am I doing this? As a daughter, am I doing this? Am I doing? And then you can say, you can award yourself the certificate that I'm decently in the ambit of the good boy or the good girl. So I think it's, but there's a lot more to that, because there's not one society. Like I remember when I was reading this, I was thinking that I grew up in Mumbai, and in Mumbai, because it's a cosmopolitan city, I grew up in a government colony. And there were many different cultures. It's a microcosm of all of India in a sense. And I grew up a little wild, I must confess. So my mother's, that's the other thing. I think sometimes I got saved because I never got the validation I was looking for. And I think my brother got penalized because he got the validation. So, I was free to do a few more errant things and find myself than my brother had in that sense. So and when my parents got transferred from Mumbai to Hyderabad, my mother went and found that the girls in Hyderabad weren't kind of behaving the way I was behaving. She said, my daughter is nothing like these girls that I'm seeing. They're also compliant, they're also, they don't seem to want, they don't challenge, and they don't, they're so much more obedient. And so in fact, I did my MBA just so that I could continue staying on in Mumbai, because I saw my mother holding one, false hair in one hand and one, jasmine flowers in the other, waiting to put it up to me. So there are so many cultures, I've seen, which fit. So obviously I was fitting in one sense, and I was not fitting in vis-a-vis in another context. So I think that's also another thing that, there's the multiple contexts that we're playing in.
So, while we talked about various things which sort of enables or facilitates the good boy to be formed, Karthik, what would be some of the things which are working against it? For example, peer pressure, for example. There is more of an allure to be a bad boy, to get peer recognition and the respect in our schools and colleges and all that, right? So like that, what are the things which pushes him back, against the formation of the good boy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Many things. I think certainly as he grows up. So first of all, I think there is the immediate sense that one has while growing up is this enveloping embrace of parents and immediate caregivers and the family and so on. And usually you find a bit of a reasonably coherent existence there. There are not too many things. But I think it's when he starts moving out of that enveloping embrace into starting to look at the world outside, that's when many things hit him. So for example, you see other children. You had the other experience of seeing good children for an ungood person like yourself, and whereas for the good boy, it's the other side. He encounters the ungood people everywhere. Right? Now, let me dip back into my personal experience here. I was born in a conservative family, Tam Bram. Grew up
Sorry, is the Tam from Tam Bram?
No, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing could be there, so it could go there, but no, it is coincidental. So grew up. Yeah, I know it. So, and then all my growing up was in a cocoon of sorts. So there's this immediate family, and I grew up in Chennai, I grew up in Coimbatore, and then wherever I went, it was all. So I studied in Vivekananda College. So they used to actually say 7 years of Vivekananda College. They say, if you're in Vivekananda College, you're like one sadhu sant. So you could be, nothing could be holier than the
And the ruffians of MCC.
ruffians of MCC, and you won't go to what they say about Loyola and all that. So it gets more revolved from there on. But the thing was, it was actually for me personally, it's only when I went to XLRI that something new opened up. I said, okay, this is also possible. People drink my age. Is it possible? I mean, like, so things like that. And so you suddenly wake up and say there is, but it's not that these are pressures that in some sense take the person away. They are actually, yeah, they are invitations, I would say. They are beckonings of the context which says, hey, there is also something like this that's happening here. And I also think that the good boy is not just one particular, and maybe we have had a conversation on this. Is he a type of a person? And I think not, because I think the good boy then starts, he's not just a personality type, like of a type. You can't box him and put him there. So he's responding to these evocations and provocations. He says, okay, fine, there's something that's pulling me here. Can I, do that one little drink that, come, Simaka. Can I take that drink? Can I do this? Can I have a little relationship with this girl? Etc. So all these things that you start responding to. And then you find that then you're, testing boundaries, all that stuff. So some people don't go there. Maybe and it's very different from person to person. So it's very difficult to actually say, and that's where the good boy is not just a type. Some people actually respond to the evocations and nudges and say, okay, let me go there. Some people don't, and some people go even further. They say, this is not for me. I feel threatened by all these things, and they stay where they are. But I think this whole thing of, to me, I think it's very precious to be able to respond to what the context offers and say, can I see something there? I don't know if I've answered your question, but
No, I think you have. Just another aspect of it, because Nimi is here, and we were talking the other day. We have a grandniece, and we were talking about how she is about 4 years old, right? So we're talking about and this refrain comes: be a good girl. If you drink your milk, you are a good girl. If you do this, you are a good girl. If you don't draw on the walls, you are a good girl. And at one point, she said, I don't want to be a good girl. Because there are so many restrictions and so many things which are like delayed gratification, if I can use that word, right? So to embrace being a bad girl might look very attractive. So what do you, how would you comment on that, Janaki, in terms of, even from very early age, because, you have some desire. Basically it's in the context of that, right? And then you are told that, but at what point do you say, look, I would rather have the desire and not conform to this whole thing of being a good boy or a good girl?
I think I am quite the quintessential ungood girl, as Karthik puts it in his book, because I don't know, I've always felt I never got the kind of, I was somehow always on the wrong side of what my parents were expecting of me. So I think it was like, I think the fear that you have when you are there is that you're lonely, because no one's taking your side and no one's actually supporting you. You're just being told you're not what is expected of you. You're not like others. So you're quite lonely at that point in time. And I think part of the struggle, even for the good boy to individuate, is to embrace a bit of that loneliness, to say that I will forge my own path. I will become my own person. I will parent myself. And so my father, I remember him telling me that we are all, I was challenging him about some things, and you're so educated, and how can you think like this? And he said, well, we are liberal in thought and conservative in action.
That's a good way of, very good way of putting it.
So that my brand is like the good boy again. So it's all of this is meant to kind of think in your head. You're not supposed to go and do any of those things. So that was not enough for me, and surely I challenged, because whether I would do it or not, I needed, in principle, I needed the freedom to be able to access that. So I think I have found the freedom exhilarating of not being I think that's why I gave that story about the monkeys. For me, that validation is also a little bit of a trap at some time. So I think it's, I think it's something that's always evoked me. It's felt positive.
Two things I just want to respond. I got triggered off. I think so. One of the things that I've taken pains to describe the book is that the alter ego of the good boy is not the bad boy or the bad girl, but instead the coined word is ungood. That is not bad. I mean, like, what scale do we say the person is bad? But we can adopt an extension of the good, an alter ego of the good scale to see the person is ungood. And I just want to read a couple of things from my book which talk about ungood because I think it would help understand that. So the ungood comes from a self-authored mind, writing one's own story, one's own script, rather than a socialized mind. The good boy comes from a socialized mind. His mind is the good boy comes from a socialized mind. He adopts the script that's given to him by parents, society, etc. Yeah, ungood boy says thank you, and I'll write my own script, and he's a bit of a counterpoint to the good boy. He's not bad, but he's not good either. Right? So he, unlike the good boy who appears sworn to uphold and take forward the expectations and norms of the system, the ungood boy is focused on his perspectives and his expectations of himself. It is a bit like the trickster identity. Has some fun playing around with challenging the norms. He's able to have his way, and in having his way, he does not necessarily have to fight the system or operate in a counter-dependent way. He veers more towards autonomy. This is what I want. So, and I think the other interesting thing with the ungood boy is that he is a bit of a threat to patriarchy. A good boy is part of the patriarchy project. Our nation being largely a patriarchal setup, it flourishes because the good boy is there. In fact, therefore, the cultivation and ongoing fostering of the good boy will be something which we'll see for a long time to come because that's what patriarchy wants. It's part of the patriarchy project. Whereas the ungood boy will challenge patriarchal norms. And the other thing is that the ungood boy has an ability to understand and give space for his desire. Even his relationships are more intimate, and he is able to express himself in a much more intimate way. That's something I wanted to say. The other one on the monkey part, Janaki, was a little bit of disturbance in carrying, which is that I worry why the world has to catch monkeys. There's something violent in that whole thing, and I think I'm linking it to what society does with the good boy. That the fact that they have to trap him is violence, and that they have to do things to get him to hold the thing in the fist and not take his hand off the pot is a bit of that's what patriarchy does. Yeah. It lures the boy to get his hand and then not be able to let go of what he has got. So I think there is something that needs to be challenged there, whether it's for the monkeys or for the good boys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to go maybe on a little bit of a tangent, right? That's one part where you have written, you have quoted many people, you have referred many thinkers, etc. But in this one, you have said TGV has TGV has to primarily deal with the me in him, and then you also got to say he does not have to engage with the I in him. So this reminded me of a spiritual guru who says the me in me and the I in I. So did you have did he influence your thinking in any way while you are writing this book?
I can swear that he must have gotten, through Jnana, he must have got some advanced copy of my book.
Sorry, that was just as an aside, but because that's sort of intrigued me.
I think, just to pick that up, I think the one other differentiation, I don't know whether you refer to that in your book, is that I think part of the movement beyond the good boy is to also start recognizing your own feelings. Even just the disturbance you felt at listening to that monkey story, so kind of see that, look, what is happening to me? So to be able to, to differentiate your own thoughts, your own feelings, and becoming aware, a more nuanced awareness of what's happening in your internal world is perhaps the first step. Also, that's also one of the things that differentiates the ungood boy from the good boy.
I just believe that I think you use the word individuation twice, and and I want to just spend a minute on that because I think it's an extremely precious word. Carl Jung is, I mean, I don't know whether he actually said it, but it's attributed to the word individuation, of course, is certainly a Jungian thing, a Jungian concept. And thank God he came up with that concept. Because somewhere else, and I think this was a Jungian who wrote about this, I'm not exactly quoting and paraphrasing, but it's that we are all individuals. We are all, in some sense, if we don't allow ourselves to individuate and see what's there and allow ourselves to grow, we end up being individuals, which means we are divided. Or, for example, our mind is divorced from our body. In our mind, we divorce sometimes our feelings from our thoughts. And then it keeps going on and on. Ken Wilber has written a lot about how we create dualisms and so on. So we are all individuals. We hold ourselves in a divided entity kind of thing. And I think the whole thing of individuation is being able to see this that I'm doing and being able to reclaim that, which the good boy struggles to do that. He does not often see the dualisms that are created, not out of his own doing, but what the context does to his parents, well-meaning parents, I'm sure, and well-meaning society, elders, whoever else. Some of them may not be very well-meaning, and the patriarchy is not very well-meaning. It will be very benevolent to say, all of it was good and so on. But yeah.
So, one of the things which, I was in touch with when I was reading this book was, as the good boy evolves in age and experience and all that, at some point he lets go of that complete adherence to the good boy and starts his own, he develops his own agency of sorts, and he sort of explores other aspects and consciously knowing the implications, and I think that's sort of a rite of passage in a way, right? But personally for me, in a way, it's happened the other way around, because when I finished my primary education, that's up to 4th, my father picked me up from a convent school, which was typical good boy school, and put me in one of the worst schools in town, where we had people from all straight out society, a very, very wild school. And there, the whole ethos was being bad. There was nothing like, if you're a good boy, you got beaten up. So, and that encouraged me to explore many things. You mentioned about drinking, at a very early age, smoking. I'm one of the few people who dropped out of degree college with my family, whole family college. But the moment I moved to, like you mentioned, XLRI and then working life and XLRI, working life, I think I started also adopting some of the good boy frameworks, right? Because it was convenient.
When was this?
So, and then you have quoted Jung again in this, which says, how can I be substantial if I don't have a shadow? Right? And to me, that was very, very powerful thing that you picked up, and that sort of summarizes this whole, completeness of a person, right? So the good side and the whatever you call it, not so good side, or there's not even a judgment. It's just a degree of a continuum in a way. So can you elaborate on that? Because picking that up in the beginning of the chapter as the quote is a very powerful thing, and that quote is also very powerful. If I don't have a shadow, I am not substantial. So can you just elaborate a little bit further on that?
This question is Janaki's question.
Yeah, after you, Janaki.
So maybe
They have a pact.
we start with Janaki and then I will. Because and the reason I'm saying that is also that Janaki Ved is one of the persons who has held an arm along with me in exploring a certain aspect of what it means to be human, and especially, and we share a common, let's say, I don't know to call it a ground of study, which is largely Jung inspired, and so shadows and archetypes and a whole lot of thought process on symbols and archetypes to you, Janaki. So this question is definitely yours.
Yeah, I think the shadow is things that you're, in a sense, a simple definition of shadow is that which you're not willing to integrate within yourself. Thoughts and feelings that you have, that you feel this is not me, what you put out, it kind of goes into the shadow area. It can come up our dreams as the not me showing out there. And actually the shadow, you can have a positive shadow and a negative shadow also. Positive shadow is something where I hold people in awe, like, oh my god, that person, this leader, fabulous and all. Actually that's a part of you that you're projecting onto that leader. And similarly, you have a negative shadow also, that I can never be like this person, how dare they do such and such a thing. And that's a part of us that we have not yet integrated or seen or willing to accept as part of our identity. So I think actually I read something very beautiful by someone who said that shadow, the negative part of whatever is the negative, the not me part, is something that is just something which is alive and beautiful, which has not been redeemed by the light of consciousness. So it's actually waiting, it's a part of us that's waiting to be redeemed with the light of consciousness, with a sense of compassion. And that's, in a sense, the integration that we're looking for to grow into healthy adults, which is what I think the good boy is pointing us to. How do you move in that direction and how do I integrate? So it's to say that I can assimilate all experiences within me are contained. I give myself permission to have all thoughts, feelings, behaviors, positive and negative. And so I think claiming that, in a sense, is something that allows for integration. I don't know, I went way beyond shadows.
No, I'm thinking on one thing which you said, which is very intrinsic to this idea of shadow. Prashant, I'm glad you asked the shadow question, and I'm glad you answered with the not me. And I'm going to a very Lacanian view. Jacques Lacan is the very famous psychoanalyst and teacher of analysis from France. A lot of my analysis is from a Lacanian lens. And he talks about how words and even the sounds of words can tell us much more about what might be there, which we are perhaps not looking at. So I heard not me as K-N-O-T, me. So it's almost like it's not N-O-T, me, but there is a knot which holds us together. The part that you see in the light and the part that you see in the shadow is a beautiful knot, and not a naughty knot, but a knot that deserves to be there. And I think in the process of fragmenting as a good boy and whatever it is that the world does to us, where we don't really get that opportunity to individuate, we don't discover that not is possible, that I can actually be fused with my shadow, understand more of it, and somewhere to me that's what was connecting, that the shadow is really not different and all. It is tied with me intrinsically as a knot. If only I can see that, that's a redemption that you're talking about. If I can see that perhaps that this is, I'm tied to this, I'm tied not in an unfree sense, but tied in a very free sense, that can do something to me. But the problem, in a sense, where it becomes problematic, is that the good boy doesn't see this very often. He's not allowed to see it. So I touched upon two, three things. One is aggression, where he does not allow his aggression to really come. So he becomes passive aggressive. So very often his aggression is seen in the shadows. And also his curiosity is also kept in the shadows. He's not allowed to be very curious. So his sexuality, how he holds his sexuality, is also kind of structured, held in bounds, and so on. And there are also these unintended consequences that come when you hold somebody in shadow. For example, one of the biggest things that happens is that I feel that if the good boy is held as just a good boy, it actually impoverishes the human context. The world loses something there. I'm not saying therefore change the good boy. And last chapter I talked about how the good boy can be more substantive, much more meaningfully held without having to change. Because saying you have to change imposes a new stricture. Then the good boy is going to say, okay, let me go out and change.
And that becomes a norm.
all over again. Right? And so, yeah.
So, if we just move a step back and look at from a little 30,000 feet kind of a thing, and look at societies and communities. So would you, if I make a statement saying that good boys make society stable, but bad boys facilitate progress, would that be, or not good boys facilitate? Because somebody has to innovate, somebody has to push the boundaries, somebody has to break some rules. Somebody has to think of something which has not been thought before, right? And that is how communities and societies progress. So is it that these two have these two different roles? What would be both your thoughts on it?
Now the last word. So I think for me, I think the good boy. One of the problematic things about the good boy is this binary thinking. This splitting. This is allowed for the good boy. This is not allowed. I think, and the good boy also perhaps that polarization that he experiences between me and not me. I think as I see it, the good boy is somebody who's not yet claimed those paths. So the good boy is somebody who can innovate, who can actually go and steal the fire, who can actually push the boundaries in some way. But those are some things that he has to make a trade-off between the validation I might receive for conforming in a certain way, and what about this part of me that is also existing, because all potentialities exist within us. And in a sense, the good boy is somebody who's patterned himself on that which he's found that the society or the context has been most receptive to. So I feel I don't see the good boy as not having those potentialities. I think I think the question to me is not about changing as much as saying, do I choose security goals which are security oriented, or do I choose goals which are growth oriented? So as long as I choose something which is actually going to further my security, I'm in a sense restricting my growth, I'm keeping myself back. So if you were able to define what would growth look like for me, what does good look like for me? I think those would be like the questions I would like to kind of leave with the good boy.
I think the other thing for me is that one of the dangers I hold is that even security and growth can become a binary of sorts. That if I say that if I'm feeling secure, then there is no growth.
Yeah.
One can challenge that. Also, a person who's invested in growth may feel secure in that growth. So I know you're not mentioning it as a binary, but I just wanted to call out that can be held together. I do want to say that, and if I look at the last penultimate chapter, I think on the corporate good boy, there's some wonderful conversations that I've had with Vishi, who's right here, with Harish, and with Vasanti Srinivasan, Pratik Kumar, who is missing, Ravi Kairan, wonderful conversations. But I think one thing that almost comes through in many of those is that they talk about a space actually somewhere which is good boyish and also ungood boyish. So something which is almost like an in-between space. For example, I think what Harish talks about, he doesn't use the term, but he points to a bivalent boy, not an ambivalent boy, but one who's not ambivalent about good and ungood, but one who's there and he says, okay, maybe I'm sometimes like this, maybe sometimes I'm like this, not being ambivalent, but being bivalent. Vasanti talks about a pragmatic good boy, and I had to struggle a lot to say, what do you mean by, I thought a good boy is only an idealistic or even a romanticizing good boy, but she made a case for the pragmatic good boy. All of that is in the book. The other one, which she talks about is perspectival breadth of the good boy, that you don't have to be caught in one past, tethered to the past, but if your perspectives are broadening, and you can still be good in that. And Ravi Kairan talks about a blend, and he talks about the zing factor. So in many ways, I think what they're also saying is, yes, I think it's not that good boys will make society stagnant, or that ungood boys are the only ones who have the prerogative of making a vibrant and great society and so on. But that there is a space for all of them to coexist, and each of them has a role to play in sustaining and growing society. The thing is, the danger is we may think that the good boy is vestigial, irrelevant. I mean, a lot of people are talking today saying, and I have a difficulty with that. They say that, okay, if I even have a difficulty with some of my interview people who have said that in the corporate, to have a leader, you must be ungood. And it doesn't have to be necessarily so. I think the good boy, just by saying that you go in one way, there is thing of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I think there are a lot of people who hold that view that the good boy is good up until a point. Uske baad, after that we have to go into ungoodness, which I think is something that's worth challenging.
What you're saying is both are relevant, and interestingly, this came up in a conversation with a friend of mine when I was telling her that I'm discussing this book with you, and it's about good boy, etc. And the relevance question came. So one comment was that you romance the bad boy, marry the good boy. So there's a space and the relevance for both. But jokes aside, in the corporate structure, right? With the shift of generations and the shifts of context of people, how people view things, even the framework of good boy must be changing, right? For example, earlier we were said, a good teammate or an employee is about working long hours, loyal to the company, putting in a lot of effort, etc., etc. And now, the context is, work-life balance. You have other things to pursue. You have output. As long as I get the results, I should have the way to do, the autonomy to do it. So, is there a shift in the framing of the good boy? I'm just taking the corporate as an example, but.
Yes, I think there is some shifts that's happening. I was Googling this morning and did some work on that. So I think even if I looked at Gen Z, for example, which is in the workforce, and there's immense goodness even in the Gen Z. But I think the way it is getting mapped out is slightly different than the traditional use of the good boy. So we have this tendency to think that, oh, Gen Z is all about ungoodness, or something else and so on, but there is, Gen Z has an immense sense of goodness from a mindful goodness point of view, not mindless goodness. Like they're not unconscious good boys. Very often they become conscious good boys, good girls, all that. I mean, there's also research. There is McKinsey research, there's Pew research which has talked about this. Like they have a certain pull towards both purpose and hype. We tend to think that this world is moving towards hype and low on purpose, which is not true. They hold both purpose and hype together. They would like to see purpose also hyped up in a certain way. My hyped purpose seems good. Some examples, for example, is that there is this whole thing about ethical consumption, which is a very, very intrinsic part of social goodness. We talked the other day about how people can they value the commons in some sense. It is very much in the minds of the generations of today is that the commons are actually important, and that we will take up activism if the commons are being trampled upon and so on and so forth. So, for example, even brands and influencers, the Gen Z is quite skeptical of this. There's even this practice of de-influencing today, right? I mean, for example, don't buy this because I bought this and I regret it. There's things that are kind of being talked about. If there's a lot of this performative activism, you just kind of do activism to kind of, let's say, woke washing as it's called. Those are called hollow marketing. These are called out by the youngsters much more than any of us would perhaps respond to. And they're also making purpose-driven career choices. I think it's not that, okay, I have to, like our generation would have said, okay, study, do this, get a stable job, get this, etc. Now I think that thing is moving on to saying, let me do not hype-driven career choices, but perhaps purpose-driven choices and so on. But I think there is also hype that plays a part in this. FOMO, for instance, and all of that is there. So there is somewhere, I think this generation is good in a redefined sense. They are very strong. Like Vishy would tell you, I think the perspectival breadth is broadened, perspectival sense has broadened, and they are flowing with it. But they're still upholding the order of what they consider good. I'll just say one more thing, Prashant. I had an interview with Chris Shankar of ex-Infosys, and we had a lovely conversation where his point that he said was that this generation increasingly is upholding the order which is not necessarily the parental order, but there's an order that they internalize from their peer structure, and they're upholding that. In that sense, within that frame of reference, they are still being good.
So that's what is sort of wanting to explore that in the earlier structures when we grew up, etc., the good boy or the framing of the good boy was within the family, the immediate society, what is good for the family, what is good for the society, etc. And for the newer generations, has that actually moved to what is good for the planet, what is good for the future generations, what is good for world peace, what is good for is there a shift from the immediate to something larger?
I think that even the earlier generations had that sense. I mean, even goodness, I think the idea of what's good for the planet or what's good for the larger cause was not lost upon the earlier generation. I think they had a modicum of belief in that. I think the frames of reference they used for that were perhaps more anchored, tethered to past practices and so on. But yeah, I certainly think that there is a lot of that that's playing into the minds of the young people of today. Absolutely.
Would you consider Gandhi as a good boy?
No. Certainly not.
Good one.
I asked that sort of we have a couple of minutes more before we throw it open to the audience to ask questions. Janaki, anything from your side to sort of conclude your thoughts on this, and then we will request Karthik also to say a few words, and then we will throw it open to the group for questions.
I think, when I look at the good boy phenomenon, to me, it's, like I said, as I see it, it's a phase it's a stage in our evolution. And to me, it's really the battle between nature and nurture. If today's generation says values the planet and there's activism as part of the order of today and the dharma of today. Somebody who wants to be completely corporate, make money, build big buildings, etc., might be seen as the ungood. So I think it's what are we referencing this good and not the ungood is with respect to 2 points. I think one is it's a phase in our own evolution as to what is the dialogue I'm having with the social structures that I'm a part of, and that in a sense, perhaps gives me a sense of now I'm being good, now I'm being ungood.
So I just want to, a couple of things I just want to say, which is, and I want to read a bit from my last chapter, because I think I poured my heart into the book. I poured my heart into the last chapter. That was something which was, I think, very important to say, because otherwise, that was what the whole book was about, that, how do we see the good boy in a sense? So a few things. So the last chapter is actually about what may lie ahead towards hope, and I want to start with a small poem. The wind one brilliant day called to my soul with an odor of jasmine. In return for the odor of my jasmine, I'd like all the odor of your roses. I have no roses, all the flowers in my garden are dead, I said. Well then, I'll take the withered petals and the yellow leaves and the waters of the fountain. And the wind left, and I wept. And I said to myself, what have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you? This is from Antonio Machado, The Wind. The garden that was entrusted to us, the good boy somewhere, beautiful metaphor to that. What have we done with it? What is society doing with this? So, I'm just now quoting myself. Early in this book, we have considered the view that it would be a shame if the good boy syndrome were to be treated as irrelevant, vestigial, and even shameful in contemporary and emerging society. It is in this context that we must explore this final chapter and imbue it with a sanguine sense. We must look at hope. Hope for the good boy, and equally hope for society with the good boy. We have talked about impoverishment of the human context with the good boy. We must look at another way and talk about the enrichment of the human context by the good boy. If we did not do this, we would indeed be guilty of the psychological or sociological equivalent of ecological apathy. There's a lot of logical stuff here, but it's something, and we may not have done enough to protect a potentially endangered species. So the new metaphors that came up for me for the good boy, and I'm sure each of you could have different ones, were the good boy as an anchor in the high seas, the stabilizing voice amidst uncertainty and constant change. The good boy is a pillar of strength, The good boy is the curator of a museum, and the good boy is the gardener. If we can look at these, then perhaps we allow ourselves to move into a more, rather than seeing the good boy as one who's just spending his entire energies at containing and grounding and doing things that have always been done before. Can we look at the good boy as a receptive, nurturant force? And I also want to say that there's a lot of, while there is a lot of pull these days towards evolutionary theories and adult development is certainly important, but again quoting, it's a strange call that evolutionary theorists and philosophers may find it difficult to wrap their heads around. We are not discussing the good boy to change in a zigzag movement from being an abiding person to a striving person. We are not even talking about vertical development. Instead, we are talking about, can the good boy remain in his location and be able to embody the full potential and the generous positives of his identity. I often quip, if you reflect, you evolve, and if you deflect, you revolve. And for the good boy, I think he has to reflect and revolve. And revolve doesn't mean that he's just going around on his axis, but he finds much more space for him to operate from. And therefore, I think it's a call for all of us, and I think all of us, including all of us who are present here in society, wherever this message can go, is that can we look at this good boy with, not with amusement, not with detachment, not with indifference, not also throw ourselves at the good boy and say, let me redeem you and provide something to you. Can we look at him with empathy? Can we look at him and see the good boy? And that's what T.M. Krishna has also said. Can we look at the good boy inside ourselves rather than see him as a force somewhere out there? And before we invite questions, I know that some of you might need or want to go a little earlier. I just want to say thank you, because for one thing is that as a musician, I know one thing, that most, at least Carnatic music from where I come from, the musicians say that the greatest joy is not in singing or playing for an audience, but it's in singing and playing for your peers, people who hold an understanding of the music and have a perspective on it the way you do. So I've had conversations of somewhat of similar nature with larger audiences in conventions and so on. But to me, today this group is extremely special because I consider each one of you as a co-musician who holds a perspective of society, holds a perspective about living, indeed holds a perspective of what it means to be a good boy or a good girl or ungood boy or ungood girl, whatever it is. And it's so important that you are here today. One part of it is very gratifying that you're here as friends and so on. But it's more than that. It's that you're here because you hold a perspective about life and living. And that's what I think this opportunity. I thank you, Lily, for this great opportunity to have had this.
Thank you, Karthik. So we can take a few questions. There's some time. So first.
Yeah.
Take this mic. I think I'm loud enough.
We have mics.
Ask Krishna, he might tell you that.
So, amazing stuff, and I'm able to relate to a lot of what the conversation has been about. And I particularly was, got very thoughtful about what you said about reclaiming the individual, right? And my question to all of you here is, as you do more and more of it, in a context that's not ready to accept that you're actually reclaiming yourself, how did you, in your personal experiences, and you, through your, I assume that you have a lot of background in psychology, how do you respond to that context without slipping back into being a good girl? Did that make sense, the question?
The meaning I've made of it is, how have I stood by myself as I've walked this path. I think many years ago I came across this quote which said, and the day came when the pain of staying in the bud was greater than the pain it took to blossom. And I think that's really what tells you, saying that this is stifling me now. So even if there's nobody out there, just the fact that you want oxygen, and that you want, that's enough for us to take the next step to grow and to evolve into whatever direction. I'm not necessarily saying that growth is something that is success. It may be something that, but it's a meaningful step for myself, and that has always been very precious to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's my response.
Yeah. And how do you respond to the context of a family, the people around you who are now like aghast? Oh my God, she can say no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's
I
my
think, yeah, you
Have the mic there. I mean,
pass the mic around. Yeah. I think that's what I said. I think sometimes if you want people to travel with you and they're not willing to, you have to endure some loneliness in that. But I have an abiding partner in myself. There is somebody who's within me. There's an ally I found within me who's walking with me, and who will lend me support at the time when there's nobody else. And as I walk on, I will find my co-travelers. In fact, one of the most meaningful childhood stories for me is the story of the ugly duckling. You know, you will find your co-travelers. Your greatest allies will perhaps not be people from your family, perhaps not even your work colleagues, but they'll emerge. The people who are meant to be with you, you take a place and then the space kind of evolves around you. That's what I've found for myself.
No, nothing much to add. But for me, like I said, maybe the journey has been the other way around, you know, sometime a few, maybe about 15 years back is when I actually started also exploring spirituality and different things. So, in a way, in our philosophy, of the Hindu philosophy, there is this whole issue of Prakriti and Purusha. So Prakriti is what is wild and natural, and then Purusha brings in order and structure and things like that. And it is not that it's mutually exclusive. And there are contexts in which you adopt or embrace Purusha, and that frees you up a lot in different ways, because and also there are times when you embrace your Prakriti, which is what is your nature, your natural being, because you have to be at some point, or I wouldn't say 100%, but to whatever extent possible, true to your authentic self. At the same time, you are in a unit of family, you are in a unit of society, you are in a unit of a larger community, and that also has demands. And if you are choosing to be in that context, then you need to sort of be adept at engaging with both. So, yeah.
Just one thing to add, I think very simple one, which is that there's something about once you have seen something, you can't unsee it. You can't just say, oh, that never, I can't. There's a visual imprint is formed. The mind is. So there's something about once you kind of go beyond and actually experience what it means to be something else other than what you have been conditioned to. I'm taking for a moment not being good or ungood, etc. You've seen something, you can't unsee it, you can't unexperience it. And so sometimes, you know, it's like this, however much the context may try to reclaim you, in a sense, to use that word, they can't really. You might actually make certain adjustments to be that, but in some sense you already seen it, already experienced it. There's nothing that can really be reclaimed. Then you're authoring yourself to say, I'll continue to be what the society or context wants me to be. But I've tasted it, I'm not going to go back. That cannot be ever taken away from me. Yeah, I did.
Karthik, I'm left quite disturbed and quite restless because there are two things that I'm experiencing right now in what you've written. One is, we've eternally talked about the fragmentation of the woman's psyche. But from whatever you and Janaki, thank you, and Prashant, thank you as well, there is an element of the fragmentation of the male psyche that we just disregard. So while the three of you were speaking, you know, reels and reels of the men I've known in the family and in the outside, and how much their lives are fragmented by what the conditioning is, stays with me. And I'd like you to respond to that. That's one part. And the other part is also somehow the good and the ungood seem to be two distinct polarities. I'm assuming that you believe, and you've written, and I will go back and read this today, but that it is a continuum, and that a person can exist in one place and in the other place concurrently, sequentially, or simultaneously?
Thanks. Absolutely. So let me start with the second part. It is absolutely true that so it's not that they are binaries, they are not poles. That if you're ungood, you can't be good, and if you're good, you can't be ungood. It's a spectrum, right? And at various times, as we kind of discover, you also have at your disposal all the identities of the past or the locations of the past. So if I have explored ungoodness, it does not mean that I cannot be a self-centric boy. So actually the spectrum we talk about the self-centric boy, the equivocal boy, the good boy, and then the ungood boy, and then the pluricentric boy. So this is like a bunch of locations that are there. If I've gone ahead and explored a certain identity or location, I still have with me all the others that are there with me. I can go anywhere there, and I can kind of fluidly, in some sense, go from one to the other, but I'm making choices there. To talk about the other one, the fragmentation, yes, whether it's male or woman psyche, there is a lot of it that happens. There's a lot of it that happens all the time. And that's what casts all these shadows, right? When we don't, all of shadow work is really about individuation, as Janaki puts it very well, that it's about saying that here are these fragments that are lying around. And if I don't give myself the opportunity, and that's an easy one to say, give myself is a tough one. If I don't have an opportunity to integrate these fragments, right, then they are going to be scattered, they are going to come back as my shadow, they're going to bother me all the time. So in some sense, I think what happens when we start looking at these fragments that are there and say, what's happening? For example, how have I cast or what in society and patriarchy has cast away my sexuality, let's say? What has cast away my ability to display or a certain sense of aggressiveness and anger? I'm constantly asked to fragment and see this part you can bring in, this part you have to keep out, and that casts a shadow. And these shadows come back in different forms in dreams, reveries, nightmares, body sensations, vague disturbances, all kinds of things. They're there all the time. If I'm able to see the fragmentation for what it is, I'm able to see, instead of fragments, I'm able to see parts of myself. They may still be lying around, but they are not fragmented anymore. They are parts of a whole that I'm able to see within myself and part and pull back as it. But I think what has happened, a large part of our patriarchal structure is that it allows fragments, it wants fragments to remain fragments and not be reclaimed in a sense. I hope your disturbance is somewhat settled.
After reading the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jackie.
Thanks, and thank you, Prashant, for letting me know about the event. I really enjoyed the discussion. And I'm sure I'll read it, but one thing, there were lots of terms like agency, validation that have been used. And you mentioned that the good boy is seen as vestigial. What's your opinion? I think good boy is essential for the current order to survive, right? Because good boy, in a sense, does what he's told. Right? So he acts, to go back to the example of the honor killing, that person is actually the one going to be facing the consequences. Everybody else is very happy, oh, he's a great guy, he did this for the family. But that person and his cohort who have committed the act have done it without consideration for what's going to individually affect them. Right? So in that sense, there is a very sacrificing element. And Prashant and I had done one event long back. To me, the quintessential good boy is Bhishma in the Mahabharata. He does what he's told. And the chaos ensued just because he was a good boy. Right? So, I don't know what your thought is, because society needs good boys actually all the time. What constitutes a good boy might change. But at any point of time, the existing order needs those good boys.
Absolutely. I mean, thanks for your question. I think it is absolutely true. That's why, for example, the last chapter is really about that the society needs a good boy. It's not even a question of not wishing him away. He is essential. And so, but the only question that is important for us to ponder over is, how do we use him in his essence? He's essential, but do we use him as in a utilitarian way, use and dispose, or for our means and ends and so on? But are we able to see that there is a part of contextual vibrancy and well-being that the good boy is intrinsic part of? And to go back to the question of identity, is that if I don't do that, the good boy becomes a fragment a shard in a mirror that's broken, and doesn't have to be that way if we can will it.
Yeah. Hi Karthik, thank you for the book. Really enjoyed reading it. A couple of things. You just mentioned the various spectrums of people, right? It struck me that through my own experience, the equivocal boy, the way you put it, right, the TEB, seems to be the largest segment. See, in the course of the book, there is, though you haven't said what percentage of people at any one point in time you think are the TGBs, the TUGBs, the equivocal boys, and so on. Do you have any comments on that? Because my perspective would be that perhaps the largest segment of people would be TEBs at any one particular point in time, given the shifting in spectrum. This is one. I've got a second question. I'll ask that after you answer that.
It's possible, Nitin. As we speak, I'm thinking along with you. It's quite possible that there is a TEB element. I think the TEB element comes really alive when the good boy is in touch with a little. There has to be some impetus for him to see beyond the good boy. The impetus can come in the form of many things. Maybe it's failed dependency. I looked up to my parentage and grandparents and my family to constantly provide me succor and whatever. And to use a Lacanian say, I may have ended up becoming a sucker to the sucker. so that's that impetus, something that nudges him is when he starts looking at being the T. He may not have the full, whatever it takes to become the ungood boy, but there's a teaser, taster element of the TEB that he plays around with. I suspect a lot of boys who are entering adolescence, for instance, especially from conventional family structures, pass through this TEB, where they say, oh, I must not embrace only what my parents are telling me. But there is danger there also, and I don't want to go there. So I think I really wish, and I think it's a good question, I really wish there was some data to say maybe they're all there. But I'm not able to 100% say that is so. But I can say this much, that the way society is moving, I think there are a lot of impetuses for people to see failed dependency in the family system. They say, okay, is this really what I want? And then when they start the questioning part, then they start moving into the equivocal stage, whether they recognize it or not. Then they are kind of somewhere there.
Okay. Thank you. I've got one more question.
I saw your second question saying you answered the first one correctly. Then I was
It was a test. No. You passed it.
Okay. The other question I have is somewhat linked to this, and right through the book, I was struck by the fact that somewhere along the thing, there seems to be some element in the book that says the good boy is an unhappy boy. I'm using the phrase, certain expressions, like I said, the castration of the good boy, the emasculation of the good boy, the angst of the good boy, right? So these words are strong words: castration, emasculation, angst. These are strong. So would you say that on the whole, the good boy, if he has to be a good boy, is going to be inherently more unhappy in life than the ungood boy? The ungood boy may find more happiness in his life than the good boy. Is that logical, or what do you think?
It's a lovely question. Yes. So I think it depends on which frame you're looking at it from. I don't think the good boy himself is unhappy, in a sense. Being in the good boy's skin, he may not see this as an unhappy. Some of them might. They see that around them, they see, okay, the others are able to do things that I cannot do, or my parental system doesn't allow me to do. They may feel. But a lot of good boys are extremely happy. I mean, I know of many, I myself have been one who's jolly till XLR hit me. This is beautiful. Well, water is paradise. I mean, what else can be there, and everything is taken care of. So, in his skin, he is very happy. But I think you're right. I think there is a certain tone of a little. So I think it came from my disturbance primarily. When looking at this phenomenon, to say, if we don't look at it soon enough, then we are going to do something with it. We are going to raise it to the ground. And I see the good boy syndrome also as part of the psychological commons of the world. Like we see physical commons, the road that we defecate in, or pee in, or throw rubbish in, or spit on, and walls that we deface routinely. I think there is, and Janaki and I had a conversation about how people mistreat commons. And I think part of the psychological commons is also is a good boy syndrome. The good boy is there, very much there. And so part of me was coming from that angst of saying, if we don't look at the good boy in a light that it deserves to, then it's going to be part of what we do to the commons in any case, puramboku, right? We just kind of do whatever it does. So I think the good boy by himself is very often, I think they are very happy, they are blissful. They are not unhappy. But I also think, Nitin, that a certain amount of looking at it through the eyes of an injury is important to look at it if you are not able to manifest, if you want to manifest change. If you look as hopefully change activists in life, if you look at it saying it's very nice, or the other way, if you don't look at it through the eyes of the wound, then we may not feel motivated enough to make the change. So maybe that's where I'm guilty of coming from that, but yes.
Hello. I really enjoyed the lecture and it was very thought-provoking. I just want to say that a good girl, is usually very happy, and there has to be a limitation to ungood. You can be ungood, but there has to be a certain limitation to it. So, just my thought.
She's far more qualified to answer this
No, I
than
think that was just a reflection. There's no question there.
But you have a comment on that comment?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the limitations of being ungood are really. Again, whose eyes are we seeing it through? You know, in fact, I feel this as long as there's a social structure, that social structure will always have a good boy and a good girl, because somebody is meeting the needs and expectations of that particular structure. And somebody who's actually going, you know, is outside the boundaries of that social structure may actually be this ungood. And what's the limitation of that? I think the thing that what Karthik said at the end, and we look at this is with empathy. We do need the good boy in a sense, in that, you know, we're talking of appropriate socialization. Today, when I look at parents, I mean, on the one hand, I've done loads and loads of process work and therapy, looking at what my parents did to me, and on the other hand, on the other hand, I look at a whole bunch of children going through, like, you know, who are with parents acting as though they are service providers to the child. You know, with saying that, did I give you a good day? Did I give you an entertaining day? Did I do this? And I feel, my God, like this, thank God, like I've raised my child before this era entered. So I think there is some level of appropriate socialization that is required, and that, you know, that is where that all of us need to carry that level of goodness, where we are respecting the commons, where we're respecting something, where we're respecting the other human beings, their need to survive as much as I do. And there is also always elements for us to, there's an opportunity to enrich by something that's not available within that structure. There's always that we can bring to it.
Yeah, just in connection with the conversation that you just had, Janaki was talking about how it's based on society. Good boys, you know, seen from a particular lens of society. And you said that, you know, you're a Tambram, you know, the Chamatik boy is a good thing of, you know, the Tambram community. Do you think it would be different for, say, somebody, you know, socioeconomically, or from a caste system, India, you know, lower caste? Would a good boy be seen differently?
Lovely question, Nidhi. And I think that's something that I've written about right early in the book. Part of my limitation has also been the context in which I am coming from. So all my access to conversations, interviews, etc. have been largely urban, middle class people, you know, sharing some of the lived realities that I lived through. That has been my access. I'd love to have more of a deeper intersectionist kind of a view, or being able to look at other sections of society and so on. I do think, and I had a small conversation when I was in Delhi with a Dalit lawyer, and I asked him, you know, how much of this do you see? And he says about 90% of what is there is true of the Dalit good boys as well. But there are also certain aspects which may not be there in the upper caste systems, may not have some of those. For example, one simple example was that their display of rawness, even the good boy's display of rawness, is a bit of an untethered rawness. He has more access to displaying rawness than a upper caste good boy. An upper caste good boy is expected to not show rawness or show it in socially approved ways. You know, at a funeral you can cry or that kind of a thing. So, but there are aspects of the good boy there in other sections which are perhaps not bound by these strictures, but they are bound by other strictures, and therefore there is a good boy-ness there. But sadly, I have not been able to get access to that in this book. But there is something, I hope that I have, that perhaps an addendum to this can be written somewhere where I'd love to have. There must be something there that deserves to be looked at. I think it is.
No, I can also respond to it because one, coming from a backward caste, and second is, like I said, after my primary school, 2 intense years I spent with my classmates who are predominantly from the lowest of the societal class. The thing of what, it's not a question of what's a good boy or what does that community value. So that makes the construct or the framework, right? What is valued in that society, and you are expected to live up to that value. So the expression without inhibition could be something which is very natural and also valued, including anger. I remember, even as kids in 5th standard or 6th standard, we used to pull out nails from the desk, put it on small wooden sticks, and we used to fight with those. I mean, in today's thing, if you look at it, you will be appalled by the whole thought of it. But it was as violent as that. But that was what was valued, and that was the expression which was allowed in a way, right? Either implied or otherwise. So the good part of it is in that society, in that community, what is valued and what do you expect to stand up for? I think that would be.
Thanks, that is.
Do we have time for one more question or?
Yeah, we can take one more question.
Sorry.
So Karthik, you said that you pour your heart into the book and particularly there are chapters, so I hope I don't break your heart by challenging you a bit. So just 2 parts to it. Why does society owe anything to the good boys? That's part 1. Because you did talk about how you wanted society to view, a good boy, to treat them with, certain respect, and give them space to operate, right? So why? Why does society owe good boys anything? The second part of that is, maybe it's not fully thought through, but I was thinking that there is a connection between growth, even from an adult development perspective, to this challenge that comes onto good boys as a part of their growth. So perhaps there is a good that will happen to the good boy from an individual perspective, maybe not societal, but individual perspective, as he or she progresses through the various stages of development. So that was my thought.
I get the first question, Shrikant. I'm not too sure about the second question, but let me try the first question first. Why does society owe anything to the good boy? I think fascinating question, because that's the whole thing, is right, the whole purpose of this kind of a meeting is to be able to not have neat answers, but to be able to walk through slush and smudge and see, can we kind of make some collective sense of it. I'll volunteer a thought from my sense. I hold the word owe in 2 senses, at least. There could be others. One is a contractual debt. I owe you something because I have to repay this for you, kind of. There's a contractual part. But there's something beyond that which I hesitate to use the word moral, but maybe it is something in that vicinity of that, which is I owe it from an institutional sense, from something that is from a value sense, right? And if I look at something from a debt repayment kind of a thing, yeah, society can cock a snook at the good boy and say, too bad. I mean, like, I owe you nothing. You are supposed to kind of, do what it takes to survive and grow and so on and so forth. And maybe society, if they do that, are probably well within they're probably well justified to that. But if we go away from that way of looking at owing to say that there is something more, there is something very institutionally value-centric that is there, and if we can look at it from that framework, then society owes a lot. Right? And it's basically, even if I take a very narrow view, let us say, if I say why patriarchy owes a lot to the good boy, because the good boy keeps patriarchy alive. And I've argued that the good boy is part of the patriarchy project of the country. So he's required, otherwise patriarchy will just fall apart. It requires this person as its the instrument, so in the hands of patriarchy. And if patriarchy is a good part of society, huge part of society, therefore society does owe something to the good boy because you're extracting so much from him. But if you even don't take that narrow, if you don't take patriarchy as one aspect alone, but it's like this, if I take society as a garden in which many of these, the good boy and good boy, all of them, the part that ecology is kept alive to a good part by the good boy. And if the good boy is not there, then you're kind of denuding that place. And my mind is going back to the Gachibowli thing that's happening in recent times, where you're denuding 400 acres of land in order to do what? You're to build concrete structures and so on in the name of development, etc. And you're throwing out things that are there without any. It reminds me of the movie Avatar and all that stuff. So I wring my hands in despair at that, saying you owe something for that ecology to survive. I mean, can we have a more equitable pact of living together rather than denuding? And so I don't think I have an answer to your question, Shrikant, but I have a response that this is what it is. But your second question missed me by a mile, so you'll have to restate that.
No, I mean, that's okay. Maybe when we meet later this week, we'll have a conversation with you.
Okay.
So I think it's time now to wrap up. Once again, thank you very much for being here, all of you. Such an engaged audience, and just for turning up, it's a lot. So please, whoever has not read the book, please read, and then bombard Karthik with all the questions after that. Anything you want to ask?
Last, absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to hear Janaki's.
Thank you so much, Prashant, for inviting me, and thank you, Karthik, for inviting me to join you in this conversation. When I read the book, I was tremendously restless, and I was like, in my head, I was sending that Harry Potter howlers to Karthik, saying, why the hell did you send your manuscript to me to edit? Like, I would have made sense of it. And then I realized the restlessness is not because of what you've written, but not the way you've written it, but the content of it is so relatable, and you can feel that. So that's part of the thing that the monkey story came to me, because it's a violent story, and so I think this is a very valuable conversation that we're having, and thank you for stimulating that. I think it's important for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Janaki. Thank you, Prashant, and thanks to all of you who have been here. And I really think this is how conversations must happen. That we must have more and more stimuli that allow us to go beyond scripts of living. Scripts of living are, and for good reason, life keeps us in boxes of various types. But to have so many, people turn up and be able to have a conversation in the midst of so many people is actually, there's something very beautiful, isn't it, in this whole thing, that we can be together to talk about something that there's something relatable to all of us in some sense. So I really want to say that's really what part of, I feel very fulfilled in many ways today, that it's possible to reach people and to have a conversation. It's all of that. And love for all of you to read the book, and if you have read it, and some of you will hopefully read it. I think there are some copies still there, Seema. If you want, you can reach out to Seema, my colleague, who will be able to give you some copies. If you run out, then you can always leave your email address and we'll reach out to you. But very important is, please write back, please call, please engage, please disturb, please find the restlessness that, find the disturbance, and Shrikant, with several of you, YJP, I'm happy it disturbs you, I'm happy it disturbs, I'm happy it makes you crump and cringe, and something like that, something must happen, our equilibrium must be jolted, and I'm happy that's happening. Because that can happen. So I think again, Lacan talks about full speech and empty speech, and what he says about empty speech is, you hear the empty speech, life goes on, nothing changes. How was your morning today? Oh, it was fine. I had a good walk. So like that he talks about as largely empty speech. Full speech, even a word or verse of full speech changes your life because you're thinking somewhere about something. I feel that today we've had an evening of full speech. And I'd love to have more and more opportunities to have full speech with many of you. So thank you very much. And
I'd also thank PIC and the team. As usual, fantastic support. Thank you so much.